Välkommen allesammans on a work trip this week. That's why the change in scenery. Time for another rant. Are the gods real? They were real living humans, or so says the cringe pagans when they get mad at me. Now, they do have a point, okay? There are some sources that say this, and these sources seem to go against some of the things that I and many of these others say about the gods being symbolic. But it is true, we do have a few sources, actually some that are regarded as very reliable, that do portray the gods, as real living human beings alongside other real historical figures. Now, there are a few reasons that this could be okay. So the actual sources that mention the gods as real humans, and what this could mean, I'll go into a little bit in this video, but I've done other videos on that. You guys have probably seen those before. If not, they'll be down below. But the main focus of this video here is the explanations of why the gods were attested as real humans and what this could mean. So there are basically 4 explanations that I've read in various books and articles that give very logical explanations for this, and it's very easy to understand. You can decide yourself which one you want to believe, but first, it's very, very, very important people realize that the gods in the real historical sources, they are completely different than the gods in the myths. There are some similarities, however. For example, in the mythological sources, the Poetic and Prose Edda, for example, written by Snorri, Odin, in one story, travels down the roots of the world tree into the land of the giants, where he finds a well of wisdom and intelligence, and in there, residing in the well, is the giant talking head named Mimir, okay? Odin takes a drink from the well, but when he does so, he has to cut out his own eye and put it in there, all in the quest for wisdom and knowledge. A similar account of this is told in Heimskringla, also written by Snorri, who kind of contradicts himself, actually very much contradicts himself in this source, but it is believed to be quite a reliable historical source for most of the later chapters in this book. But in here, Ynglinga Saga, Odin was a real living king, and Mimir was his all-wise counsel who stood beside him. He was eventually traded off to another warring kingdom as a hostage, but they ended up cutting off Mimir's head and they sent it back to Odin. Odin ends up preserving that head with herbs, chanting magic spells over it so that the head would stay preserved, and then it would share its secrets and wisdom with Odin. Okay, so that actually sounds something like very real, like humans all over the world practice these things with their shrunken heads and things like that. So this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. The historical accounts sometimes have a tiny bit of resemblance to the myths, but that does not make the myths real events. Of course they are symbolic. So the people bringing up the sources of the gods being real humans, first of all, they need to actually read the sources instead of just talking out of their ass. That's the first thing. But then, once we've done that, we can have a discussion on the reliability of these sources and what they really mean. And this brings us to our first explanation. The myths and historical sources from the time were all written by Christians who were trying very hard to stamp out pagan beliefs. One of the things they did in order to accomplish this was portray the pagan gods as real humans. They wrote down the stories of the actual pagan religion and added it into the real historical sagas, and in there they depicted the gods as real humans, often very unappealing humans, as a matter of fact, who were usually ancestors of the current king of the time. Like, the authors were pretty much just saying, hey, your gods are not real. They were just humans who you all, over time, stupidly amplified the history and started worshipping as a god, but they are not gods. How about you worship our God instead, and Jesus and the Virgin Mary and all that holy stuff, okay? That's the first explanation. We know the Christians did do this when they wrote all the sources. All the sources are written by Christians. The ones that weren't written by Christians were burned, and the ones that we do have still alive that were written by pagans are the ones the Christians wanted to keep alive. They had the chance to burn them, but they didn't. So just remember that. That's the first explanation, that every source we have could be just Christian propaganda at the end of the day. It's not just Christian people, because this idea existed long before Christianity. They didn't start doing this. This is an idea that we call Euhemerism, going all the way back to ancient Greece. I'm not a big fan of this idea, and I am not a big believer in it myself, but it is a good explanation and absolutely possible. Second idea that I don't really like either is the fact that humans named their children after their gods. Oh yeah, there is that. So just like a Christian in South America names their kid Jesus or Maria, and sometimes those kids grow up to be great things, just like some Muslims name their kids Muhammad and they end up to be great things too. Just as easily, someone in early Iron Age Scandinavia could have named their child Odin or Freyr. I don't know why anyone hasn't talked about this, but it's so simple. We do know, but by the time basically that we have the records coming from of the gods being real humans, usually they're from anywhere from around the year 0 to the year 500 is when we hear most of these stories of the gods being real humans. But by that time, the religion was already firmly established. We know this by looking at the etymology of the gods' names and tying them all back to a much older Indo-European root. Just one example being the Norse god Tyr, and that comes from the Germanic Tivas, Roman Mars, and they all come from the original Deus, okay? Again, I don't fully believe this explanation of it, but it is a very logical explanation and could definitely be possible. Another, this one is probably my favorite, is that humans at certain times in history imitated the gods and their myths in ritual. And this is where the idea that gods were real humans comes from. The myths started originally, as I always speak about and as many people have spoke about before, that the myths were originally just created as a way to personify and understand the various aspects and energies in nature. And over time, humans took these myths and took these roles on themselves. This is something called sympathetic magic or imitative magic. For example, it could be something like a king dressing himself up as what he thought the fertility god might represent, or what the sky god might look like, and then the princess or the May Queen, for example, would dress herself up as the fertility goddess. Then at the spring festival, a ritual would be held by the whole village, and it would end with the king banging the princess. Sometimes completely out in the open, because the idea is that that ritual and that act imitates the fertility god, plowing the fertility goddess. And the idea is, and the hope is, that it would help the land and the livestock in the surrounding area also be plowed and give life to the crops. We have the most clear records of these types of rituals and practices happening in ancient Roman sources, at least the ones in Europe, and lots more in other places in the world. But yeah, we know that it was done in the north of Europe too, hence Freyr, who represents the seed. He bangs his own sister, Freyja, who represents the egg, and Freyr also bangs Njörðr, who represents uncultivated land. So I really like that explanation, and I think every attestation of the gods as real humans can be explained by this. Another explanation that fits very well, that I like a lot, is that the real historical source gods, they were not actually gods, but they were humans being possessed by a god, okay? Again, this is something that was believed by all tribal cultures around the world, everywhere, if we go back far enough. That at certain moments, especially in rituals or altered states of consciousness or trance or meditation or whatever, the spiritual energy of the god can in fact come in and possess a human body. This can happen for a few moments, like during a ritual, or in a crazy, frenzied state of mind in war. Sometimes it can happen for longer, for a few days, and sometimes a human's whole life. That God can come in and possess that human and control it. Again, this is believed in Africa, Asia, South America, everywhere. And it's not that that human is a god. The baby was born the same. The baby was born a human, exactly like all of us. It can die, it's mortal, it's just like all of us. But at some point, the spiritual energy of the god was believed to take residence in that human's body and have some influence and control over it. This theory actually fits very well with certain gods like Odin. This is actually what Odin's name means. It's the one who works himself into a frenzy, up into an ecstasy. It even makes sense with Freyr, who represents not the seed, but the spiritual divine energy that takes residence in the seed. So maybe some human came along who had a green thumb and he was made king and everything around grew and it come to life. So humans believed that the god was living in this human and they called him Freyr or whatever his name was before, we don't know. This is exactly what the sources mentioning Freyr was as a real human suggest if you actually read them. I really like that explanation too, but you can believe whatever you want. Those are just 4 explanations that are much more logical to explain this whole thing than the cringe pagan response of, yeah, the gods are too real, I speak to them every day. But yeah, those are 4 explanations, but I'm open to any other logical ones that make sense. I would love to hear if you guys have any. Write them down below in the comments. That's why I make these videos, to share ideas, share knowledge. One last thing. When I say things like the gods are symbolic and they represent various aspects, various energies in nature and the universe, I don't want you to think that I'm saying that you can't have very real experiences or visions even of the gods, okay? Of course you can. I can tell you that I definitely have, although I won't share these things on YouTube. I only share them in private videos on Patreon. But even I will agree that it is very possible to have experiences or visions of the gods and they come to you in physical form and you see them clear as day. Just be aware that this is your own consciousness manifesting the god into that form that you have just seen, okay? The gods do not have a human form. We made them into human form. That energy that you're feeling, in dreams or meditation or altered states of consciousness, sure, that might be a god. That might be the divine spiritual energy of the god. But the image of that god appearing to you before your eyes, that was created by your own mind. That was created inside your own head. This is why in the north of Europe, they pictured Thor as a big, strong man with a hammer and red hair. It's the same reason in ancient Greece they pictured him as Hercules or Zeus, or in India as Indra, or in Eastern Europe as Perun. If horses worshipped Thor, then Thor would look like a horse to them, okay? These are not my ideas, guys. We have records of this philosophy going back 3,000 years at least, and coming from ancient Greece at the earliest. Humans will always personify and manifest the gods into the image that resembles themselves the most. But the energy of that god and the symbolism of that god is the same everywhere in the world, everywhere in the universe. The only thing that is different is our perception and personification of that divine spiritual energy that we call a god. I like the word deity better, but yeah, you guys can call them whatever you want. But yep, that's all I have to say for today, my rant, and there'll be a couple more videos coming soon, and then I will be away on vacation for a couple weeks, and not much else happening then. So that's all I have to say. Vi ses nästa gång.